All right, the playoffs are here as 16 drivers have a shot to dethrone Jimmy Johnson and Chad Knaus after a remarkable lap at Homestead last year propelled the 48 team to their 7th Cup championship. And, of course, Chicago this Sunday starts the final 10 races of the season. We have everything covered for you today on this show. Driver analysis, championship odds, predictions, and much more as Prime Sports NASCAR on PSN starts now. All right, so let me introduce my two co-hosts to the show, NASCAR analysts, and they've been with me for the last several years. They were with me in the beginning of the season and several other times during the season as we talked a whole lot about all the activity all season long. And, of course, we'll double-check our preseason predictions and see how everybody's holding up there. First off, let me welcome back the senior writer at NASCAR.com, Kenny Bruce, to the show. Kenny, good talking to you again.
Good talking to you, Greg.
And also going to introduce CJ Radune. He's a RotoWire.com writer for NASCAR and F1, as well as a two-time racing Rider of the Year award winner by the Fantasy Sports Writers Association. CJ, good talking to you again.
Good talking to you as well.
All right. So before we really get into this, let's first question, Kenny. Before we get into the whole playoff thing, what did you think about, what have you thought about so far about the big change, the stage change, and how that is at least going to help Martin Truex Jr. and maybe hurt some of the drivers coming into the playoff, and how you think it's worked so far for you personally and what you've heard from the fans?
Well, Greg, I mean, for me, I've kind of thought all along that we really weren't going to get a good indication or a good idea of how important the stage racing was, and how much effect those points could have until we got into the playoffs and got an opportunity to see just exactly what it was going to look like. And now the field for the playoffs is set. Martin Truex has 18 stage wins, which is just a tremendous number.
Yeah.
He's 20 points ahead of Kyle Larson going into the opening race of the first round this weekend here in Chicago. I think it's made a lot more of a difference than people anticipated and the teams thought going in. And I think by the time they realized, hey, this is something that we really need to be focused on and paying attention to, there's no catching Truex on that. And a lot of people think that basically because of the number of points he has, he's got a free pass into the finals. I don't see that as being the case, only because one bad race can wipe out a tremendous number of those points, and it can happen to anybody. So I'm sure those guys are confident, but I don't want to say they're comfortable with that. The fans, I think, for the most part, it's almost like the playoffs themselves. You have a large group of people that like it and think, they can recite races this year where there was, a battle for the lead coming to the end of various stages.
Mm-hmm.
And it did add some excitement to those races. And there's some people, that are just old school and they're like, look, I don't know why we have to have this. But I think for the most part, it's accomplished what NASCAR hoped it would. It's kind of picked up the pace a little bit in the races and made each of the stages, then now they carry some importance with them, and you're not just out there logging laps trying to get to the end of the race.
Pros and cons for you, CJ?
Very similar, actually. I like the way that differing strategies have kind of come about, as Kenny said, so you get a little bit more excitement midpoints through the race. I don't like necessarily the lead, I guess, that Truex has built up. However, I agree. I think everybody realized after he had built up that massive amount of points that, oh, crap, we need to start paying attention to this too. And I don't think it's going to get him all the way to Miami. I think it probably gets him through the first two rounds, but then after that, I think it kind of evens out because then he's going to have some real competition, and those are the ones that he's going to have to beat.
Is there, and I haven't looked at how it all works, but is there a shot, CJ, for like if Martin Truex were to have back-to-back DNFs or something close to that, does he all of a sudden have to do something in that third race in the first stage, in the first round?
Back-to-back DNFs, yeah, he'd almost virtually have to come out and win.
Okay.
it basically gives him the points, so that those points kind of reset with each round. So it gives you, what it does is that 20-point gap or whatever that he's got to Larson, that guy kind of gives him one mulligan race each round. If you go more than that, you're in trouble.
Okay. All right. Well, and I guess, of course, it's not that he's done that very often, but it has happened. I mean, he had that stretch of, 5 races a couple of months ago where things didn't go well for him. Finished 33rd, 34th, 37th. So anything is definitely possible. What do you think about the way that things have worked out with the specific drivers, Kenny? And I'm talking about guys like Austin Dillon, Ryan Newman, probably throw in Blaney. Now, Stenhouse won 2 races, even though they're both on the plate tracks. Drivers that you didn't really think, didn't really have a consistent season, but were able to go out and kind of steal some wins, as opposed to maybe, I don't know, a few other drivers that didn't make it. Like Eric Jones had a really incredible end of the season, and he just didn't get in.
Yeah, there were some guys that had, really good seasons. Not great, but they were consistent. They weren't top 10, but say they were top 15, they were top 18, they were top 20, and they had a shot, to get in there. But then, because you had a couple of guys that actually finished the regular season from a point standpoint before the reset that were ahead of some of these guys that had the one win, that were ahead of Casey Kane. They were ahead of Austin Dillon. But because those guys had a win that put them in there. But I like the fact that, if you get a win, you're basically assured of having a playoff spot. Now, they ran well enough to win a race. They ran well enough to be in the top 30 in points. So I think that's basically their reward for doing that. Would it be better if a guy that didn't win a race, got in there? Well, you have that. And I think that's part of the charm of this system. It's like it almost combines the best of both worlds. You have, you wanted to reward people that won races, and you're doing that. But at the same time, for those people that always wanted to say, well, it's what you've done over the entire season that should count. Well, it is now. I mean, what you do over the first 26 races does count. It can earn you a berth in there, too. So I kind of think that's the best of both worlds for those guys. And I like the mix of drivers that we had in there.
Yeah, and we are talking about 16 drivers. We're not talking about 8 where we're
right.
going. Shouldn't these guys get in? I mean, if you can't get into 16, or if you can't get in even to top 12, with the 4 drivers, I think there were 4 drivers I just mentioned, then, you maybe probably just don't deserve it. And it's not like they're not going to race anymore. Guys like Eric Jones, I mean, they're young kids, so they're still going to try to go out there. I mean, he's going to try to go out and get the first win. That's going to mean a whole lot to him. And might even mean more to him than getting. I think it'll probably. Wouldn't you agree, CJ? It'll mean more to Eric Jones to get a win in the last 10 races than to go to the playoffs and lose in the first round.
Absolutely, 100%, without a doubt. And it kind of annoys me. You got these people that are in the running now, in these top 16 that got in there by virtue of the win that Kenny just mentioned off. Like Austin Dillon in particular, there was a quote from him, I think, at the end of the week that said, "We've got nothing to lose in the playoffs." Well, yeah, actually, you don't, but you actually have to be competitive to come out and try to win another race, and you've really only been truly competitive that one time. I mean, you've been close, and you had a good season, but it hasn't been Martin Truex, it hasn't been Larson, it hasn't been Kyle Busch. So, yeah, I think these guys like Eric Jones, Clint Boyer, Daniel Suarez, one win, regardless of whether it's in the chase or not, in these last 10 races would be a huge deal for them.
All right, let's take a look at the preseason odds. You had Kevin Harvick and Jimmy Johnson were the 2 favorites at 7-1. And then you had Kyle Busch, Martin Truex Jr., Joey Logano at 9-1. What also stands out is you had Kyle Larson down at 22-1. And then, so really no other major surprises as far as the odds are concerned. We had our preseason picks as well. And I know that both of you guys, even though actually all 3 of us put Joey Logano in the Final Four, which we can talk about him obviously. With CJ and Kenny, you both went with Joey Logano to win the championship. So I still have Kyle to win the championship. And and we all have three drivers from the since we all had Logano, we only had three drivers in the final four. CJ, you had Harvick, Keselowski, Truex. Kenny, you had Kyle, Harvick, and Truex, and I had Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, and Truex. And Kenny's sleeper was just like my sleeper, and we hit this one on the head, Kenny, with Kyle Larson as the sleeper at 22-1. CJ went and rolled the dice with Daniel Suarez as the sleeper. How disappointed were you with Suarez, if disappointed at all, since he was your sleeper, CJ?
Not disappointed at all. I think he'd had a fantastic season as a rookie. I mean, he didn't know he was going to be driving in the Cup Series in, end of November, and 2 months later he's racing at Daytona in the Cup Series. I think he had a fantastic first half of the season, and he got even better the second half of the season, and continues to get better. And I think like Eric Jones, I think he's going to have an opportunity to win in these last 10 races. He may not actually get it done. I think Eric Jones has been closer on a few more occasions, but I think Suarez definitely is a name to watch out for in the future.
And as far as Logano, Kenny, wow. We all know that it's no coincidence that Joey Logano struggled since the encumbered win in Richmond. Something happened there with the team, with the equipment. What do you think, if you had hit it on one specific thing, why do you believe that Joey Logano struggled after that, after a great start? Again, we all picked him to make the Final Four for a reason. He gets off to a great start. He's got the win at Richmond, and it looks like he's on his way. Boom, encumbered, and then he just fell apart. And even Keselowski didn't have a great second half of the season either, compared to what we know he's capable of doing. So what do you think happened there?
Well, I don't think that there was one specific thing, but I think it was a combination of things that they were doing on the 22. And they'll say, well, that wasn't, the reason we got the encumbered win. That's not the area we were going down that was, leading to our success. So by, having that win be encumbered, that shouldn't have really affected us going forward. But it's obvious that it did. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no denying that. But numerous other drivers have talked about that this week, or asked about it, about the surprises and who made it, who didn't. And the ones that mentioned Joey, talked about, that fall off and how hard it is. I can't remember who it was, if it was Kevin Harvick or someone was explaining that, look, when you're doing things to your cars and you're building them a certain way, and all of a sudden you discover that, hey, we can't, or we're not going to get by with that. That's pushing it too far. You can't change that kind of stuff overnight. That it takes a while to do that. But why they weren't able to rebound and at least have enough speed to make the top 16, because I mean they were, look how competitive they were last year. That really surprised me. I mean, I've seen teams, they get spanked and get their hands slapped and for doing things, and they went back and said, okay, we're not doing that anymore. We're not pushing against those, but they still remain competitive. Mm-hmm. They don't completely fall out like that. And I think that was the biggest thing that surprised me about that team, was that they just weren't. We went all season thinking, okay, they're going to turn it around eventually because they're too good a team, they're too talented, and they never did. And that really, really surprised me.
CJ, out of these drivers, because I don't know yet, silly season and all, I don't know who's contracted to come back next year, but out of these five drivers, who is the most disappointing? And again, I don't even know if they're coming back. That's why you guys are here. Danica Patrick, Paul Menard, AJ Allmendinger, Trevor Bayne, and Clint Bowyer. Which one was the most disappointing to you, and are they all safe next year?
Danica Patrick, and she is not safe next year. So she just announced on Thursday that she's not coming back to Stewart-Haas. I think when you look at that team, they've won 2 championships since she's been on board. She just has not matched her teammates in any respect of the imagination. And she came out with comments saying that it was a crew chief driven organization, in that the crew chief determines kind of how the car is set up. And so that kind of implied to me that she wasn't getting her way in how she wanted the car to be set up, which is head scratching because I think everybody's vested in everyone's communal success, and certainly the other teams on that organization have seen success. But she's barely even gotten inside the top 20. It seems on most weeks at any given time, and ranking 28th overall in the standings. That's just terrible.
Kenny, how about you? Out of those 5 drivers, and what do you think about Danica?
Yeah, I think Danica she pretty much reached as high as she was going to reach in the series. I think what we've seen out of her this past year, she had bright spots, but more often than not, she was average or below that. I think in some instances, but there's no question she's a talented driver. But she's not somebody that was going to put up wins. She was going to struggle, just like she's not the only one out there that's not winning races and not living up to their expectations, I don't think. But, the bigger surprise to me probably was Boyer. Mm-hmm. Even though I said all along that just because he was getting into the 14 car, that was not going to make him an automatic threat, an automatic winner, because that car was not great last year. It was good, but it wasn't great. There was work that still needs to be done there. But still, with him coming in and the change and everybody being invigorated and looking forward to this year, I thought they would run better, and I thought he would probably stand a chance of making the chase. And those guys just, they didn't do it. And it wasn't like it was, from a point standpoint, for a while there, it looked like he had a shot. But, he really didn't. And, he was frustrated after the Richmond race, and I understand why, because, you've only got so many years you can do this. And that's another year that slipped by now that they're not in the playoffs.
CJ, Chase Elliott, who's now 30-1 to win the championship, was started out the season at 12-1, and I know we talked about that on the preseason show about he's getting a lot of respect to be 12-1. He was ahead of Dale Jr., Hamlin, Kenseth. Names in the industry. So does that mean that this was a disappointing season for him?
Yeah, I think it does, actually. I think he probably this year should have come away with a win. Look at the guys that have won. Ricky Stenhouse with 2, Austin Dillon got in there. You've had a couple of guys that were closer. The first half of Elliott's season was definitely showing promise. A lot more single-digit finishes, whereas when you look at the second half of the season, there are a lot more double-digit finishes. So I think as the season went on, I don't think the team kept pace. I don't think he kept pace with the rest of the competition that's out there, and I think he maybe even took half a step back when in that second half of the season he should have been way more comfortable with the equipment that he's got for 2017. Obviously had a pretty good 2016. You would have thought at one point he would have had a visit to victory lane, but his best finish was back in June in that second half of the season when he finished second at Michigan.
Yeah, did you expect more out of Elliott, Kenny?
Yeah, after last year, I did. I didn't expect him to go out and win 5 races or do anything like that. But when you look at, and it's like CJ said, look at the guys that won this year. Ricky Stenhouse wins 2 races. Ryan Blaney wins a race for the first time. Ryan Newman gets a win. Casey Kane, who hasn't won, in forever, wins at Indy. Austin Dillon gets the Charlotte win. Those guys are winning, and Chase Elliott, who's driving the number 24 for Hendrick Motorsports, doesn't get a win. To me, that's very disappointing. I think those guys, this was the year that they needed to start knocking out wins, and they didn't do it. And, he's got 10 races left, but they really need to start picking it up and showing some speed and contending and being top 5 on a regular basis.
Speaking of disappointing, this is the last driver before we get into the playoffs. CJ, Dale Earnhardt Jr. Do you think the way the season went for Jr., because I remember earlier on in the season there was some criticism about people saying, I think he's already kind of cashed it in. He's kind of retired already. I didn't buy that at that time. I'm not sure I still do, but I don't know what happened. They just didn't do anything the last couple of months of the season when it kind of looked like in mid-season that maybe they would have something going, but no top 10s in the last 11 races or something like that.
Yeah, not since Sonoma. Sonoma was his last top 10, and that was a 6th place finish. And like you said, that's kind of the middle of the season where he started getting some top 10s, starting to show some traction because the start of the season started off with a 37th, a 30th, 16th, 14th, so nothing even really close to the top 10 until you got to Texas, which was traditionally a good track for him. So I don't necessarily think that he's already checked out. I don't think that's the same criticism. I think he's still really hungry and really wanted to get into that chase, given that it's his last season. But I just think that he and the team just didn't figure out what they needed to do. I think it was at the beginning of the season he was saying we need to arrive on Friday at the track with a car that's got a better setup, and he was taking too much time into the weekend to find the right setup, to find some speed, so he was qualifying poorly. In the middle of the season, they started to get some traction on that, but again, I think like Elliott, toward the second half of the season, I think everybody else continued improving, where they just weren't able to meet those, let alone meet the expectation, but go beyond that, and I think they just kind of stagnated and maybe got a little bit frustrated, which creates a bad cycle.
What are your thoughts on the season for Junior, Kenny? Obviously very disappointing, and look, it's a huge loss for the sport. That's a huge fan base, and I remember watching some report a couple of months ago. I don't know if it was somebody said something about, well, where are his fans going to go? You know, they're going to have to. Are they going to stay? You know, are they still going to be fans? Are they going to have? They're going to have to find another driver to root for. So. How does that all work?
Yeah, well, you know, as far as where his fans go, honestly, I wish I knew. But it's, you know, I mean, he's not the first popular driver that stepped out of the sport.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's not going to be the last. And those guys, his fans, most of them will find somebody else to gravitate toward, just like Jeff Gordon's did. You know, it's going to happen. I don't think that's going to be an issue. As far as from a performance standpoint, you know, yeah, I expected more out of him this year, but also realized that, you know, he missed the last half of last season. And he comes back this year, and it's a new rules package, and he's got to get used to that. And it's going to take a while. And like you guys both mentioned, you know, he started off slow and probably started kind of catching up a little bit around Texas. But they still struggled. And this year, at one point, remember, you know, they went to the 48 team and Jimmy Johnson and said, hey, what are you guys doing? We're going to run your setup. We want to try your setup. So they were searching. I don't think they gave up on it at all. But, you know, I think the good runs they had, it was, you know, it was emotion carrying them and just really, you know, they worked hard to get those. But they weren't competitive enough to do that week in and week out. They just weren't. They were behind. And I don't think it would have been any different had this been, you know, his just another year instead of his last year when he's ready to step out of the car. I just think it was a situation of where they were coming in after missing so much last year.
Who's replacing him, Kenny?
Alex Bowman, who drove,
Good for him.
did very well for him last year in a relief role.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. And what are the other big changes, CJ, as far as drivers coming into new teams or switching cars? What do we know right now?
Well, we know Danica Patrick is not going to be back at Stewart-Haas. We believe Eric Almirola is out at Richard Petty Motorsports with, I think there's a rumor that Darrell Wallace Jr. may be in there.
Okay.
Alex Bowman obviously coming in for Dale Earnhardt Jr., Paul Menard's taking his sponsorship and going elsewhere. So, I mean, there's a lot of movement going on. We've got Chase Elliott moving from the 24 to the 9, and then who was it? William Byron that's coming up as well, Kenny?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Where's he going, Byron?
He's going to be in Hendrick. He's going to move into the 24.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, he's taking over for Casey Kane.
Oh.
But the car will be numbered. They'll take the 24 number and put it on his car, so the 5 won't. Hendrick Motorsports won't fill the 5 next year. So Chase Elliott will be in the number 9, which everybody's been waiting for since his dad, won a championship with that number. And then the 24 will go to William Byron, and there will be no 5 car.
Okay, so there are still who are free agents, notable free agents right now? Then would Casey Kane be the most notable?
Yeah, between him and Matt Kenseth is still out there, you know, because he's been replaced by Eric Jones.
Yeah. Okay.
Kurt Busch still technically doesn't have a contract for next year.
Kurt Busch doesn't have a
Correct.
contract.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. His has not been. They have Stewart Haas hasn't picked up the option on that, and a lot of that has to do with the Monster Energy sponsorship because they are, the primary sponsor for that. It just depends on what they decide to do since they're already the series sponsor.
Do you think it's a big distraction or even a significant distraction when drivers are in this situation, they're in the playoffs and they know they're not coming back? Not just the driver, but a lot of the team members have no idea where they're going to fit in. Or is it hit or miss? It all depends. Maybe it's a rallying cry for the team. Let's see what we can do. Or do you think history tells you when that happens, it's not going to go well for that team, Kenny?
Well, it can go either way, but
okay.
In some instances, you have situations where, this driver's not coming back next year, or this team is changing. So the guys on the team start looking for other jobs.
Yep.
Because they've got to still put bread on their table.
Sure.
So you may have some movement there that kind of upsets things, and it changes. The focus isn't just on, hey, what do we need to do to get ready for this week and the weeks after that. So it can be a distraction. Now, Kurt Busch was asked yesterday about, the contract situation and if it could be a distraction for him. And, he said it really wasn't, that, they'll still focus on the races and everything and let it take care of itself. But you still know, it's in the back of their minds. It's going to have some impact. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. As far as the playoffs are concerned, and now they are called the playoffs, is there anything besides, of course, the point system that we touched up on the Open, CJ? Anything new, or is it just same thing? Three races per stage for the first first three rounds, I should say, and then that's it. Whoever has the most points moves on, and then the final four drivers at Homestead.
Yeah, that's correct. Basically, a new name, new trophy, but then the addition of the stage points that carry through each of the rounds, assuming you're able to advance and don't get a win. So.
Okay. All right. So let's take a look at these drivers, and again, I'll give the championship odds, and then I'm going to ask each of you just a quick analysis on whether or not you believe, and then if I do get to a driver that you think will make the final four, obviously go ahead and say that, and at the end we'll go over those final four, and then get your final predictions on who's going to win the championship. So let's go ahead and start at the bottom. Jamie McMurray. What do you think about McMurray? His chances of advancing very far, Kenny?
Well, I think out of the first round and the times that he's been in it, but I think he's showing enough consistency that he can get the points he needs to get in there. But I don't see him advancing any further than out of the first round.
All right, Jamie McMurray right now 100-1 to win the championship. Matt Kenseth next. Before I get to Kenseth, you CJ, what do you think about McMurray at 100-1?
I think he gets into the round of 12. I think it'll be very tough for him to move on to the round of 8.
Has this has been CJ? Has this been like one of his most consistent seasons?
In recent memory, yeah. I think he's been much more consistent as the season has wound on, and I think he's kind of feeding off of some of the success of Kyle Larson too. So I think some of that's bleeding over, which has benefited him in 2017.
All right, CJ, what do you think about Matt Kenseth at 25-1?
I think Kenseth has the ability to go on points all the way to the final four. I'd probably have him out at round of 8, though.
Okay, but he's a potential sleeper for you.
Yes.
At 25-1. What do you think about Kenseth's chances here? Because this is a driver, as we mentioned. This is one that may have the distractions as far as the team is concerned.
Yeah, but honestly, I think he's got a chip on his shoulder.
Okay.
Because he's out at the end of the year. He knows he's not coming back to that team. He doesn't have a ride. He's not signed anywhere for next year, but they have been good. And I agree with CJ. I think he can, if they don't shoot themselves in the foot, they can points race their way into the Final Four like Newman did a couple of years ago in 2014, I believe.
Okay.
And honestly, Kenseth, there's no logical reason for this when you look at the numbers of where everybody stacks up with the points and everything right now. But I have him going into the Final Four.
Oh, wow. All right. So we know who your sleeper is. Matt Kenseth at 25-1. Next up, Kenny, we've got the next two drivers actually are both the long shots of the field. They're both 200-1. Casey Kane and Austin Dillon. Will either of them get past the first round, Kenny?
I would be surprised if they did, honestly. I think they both, they won a race. It wasn't like, oh, we've been waiting for this win to come. I think it was a surprise when both of those guys won those races. I think that, they were fortunate that they got those and they've run well enough to make it, but I do not see them being anywhere near consistent enough to advance out of the first round.
Yeah, Dillon winning the fuel mileage race at Charlotte,
Mm-hmm.
and then Casey winning. Do you think that that race was the most exciting race? Maybe not race, but a finish of the season, the Brickyard, Kenny?
Well, it was a good finish. I mean, honestly, based on what we've seen there in the past, I thought it was.
Yep.
Whether or not it was the best finish, I don't know.
You have one?
I certainly left there feeling better about that race than I have in years.
Yeah, that's true. What was the most exciting race for you, Kenny? You have one? Sticks out?
Honestly, I don't know right off the top of my head. That's a good question.
All right, we'll get back to you on that. How about you, CJ?
Sure.
Do you have a favorite race, finish, race in general? And then what do you think about Dillon and Kane, whether they have a shot to get past the first round?
First of all, I think Dillon and Kane are both out in the first round. I think they did very well to get in here, but I don't think they're going to be able to be competitive enough to move on to the final 12. As far as most exciting race, I think Daytona. I mean, you got Kurt Busch, who's one of the best restrictor plate drivers ever, to not have a victory, to finally be able to get it done. I thought that was a real highlight. I know it's tough to say the first race of the season after you've had so many more is the best one. It's kind of a cop-out, but I really think I was happy with that for him, just because of how long he's been trying on these types of tracks and how good he's been to finally get it done.
Hey, but there's nothing wrong with having the best race of the year be the Daytona 500, Kenny.
That's true.
All right. So good segue, by the way, into Kurt Busch. I'll stick with you, CJ. Kurt Busch, who is 60-1. It's a big number for the Daytona 500 winner, who actually has started to pick things up with 3 straight top fives.
Yeah, but he's definitely started to pick things up. I think he started the season strongly. I think he faded off a little bit, but now he's starting to kind of rediscover that form. So I think that gets him certainly through the round of 16, potentially through the round of 12. I would put him into round 8, but that's about as far as I would go, and even that's a little bit of a stretch. And the only reason I'd say that is just because of how recently he's picked it up.
All right. What do you think about Kurt Busch, Kenny?
Well, I think CJ makes some good points. The consistency that those guys have shown has been really good. And when we talked to him yesterday, he said that when they were coming out of the off weekend, he told his guys, look, all these teams prepare for the chase or playoffs. I'm sorry, have these cars and changes set aside that they're going to bring out once the playoffs get started. And Kurt said, look, why are we waiting until the playoffs get started? We need to be running better now. We need to have our best stuff out there now. Let's make sure that it's right and that it's working. And he said, they've already brought out their good stuff. He said, now that can be, it can go 2 ways. It can either be really good and you get the finishes like we've gotten, or you find out that, okay, we think we're good, but then the other guys bring their stuff out and they're so much better than they are. So, I agree though. I think he goes to the 3rd round. Gets to the round of 8, but I think that's it for him.
All right. Did you come up with your favorite race of the year, Kenny?
No, I'm still looking. But
Okay.
I'll have it here shortly.
Yeah, you just interject at any time.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go on now, Kenny, to Ryan Newman, who is 100-1, and Newman has also picked things up towards the end of the season. He's got 4 straight top 10s, including a 3rd at Richmond. So good timing for Ryan Newman. Can he duplicate what he did a couple of years ago?
Yeah, it has been really good timing for those guys, and I've been impressed with what they've done. But I really don't, they've been so, inconsistent for the most part. They got the win in Phoenix earlier this year, but they really haven't done a whole lot outside of that. He may surprise me and points his way through a few more rounds, But I see him getting out of the first round, but I don't really see him getting out of that second round.
All right. What do you think about Newman, CJ?
I would actually put him out of the first round. So
Ooh.
I think he's one of the first four to drop. I think, like Kenny said, he's just been a little bit too inconsistent. And with these rounds being 3 races long, I don't see him being that consistent, even though he's got a couple of top 10s recently. I don't see him doing that through 3 rounds when you've got this many people that have been having some really good finishes recently. So I see him this being as far as he goes.
All right, CJ. Next is Chase Elliott at 30-1, as we mentioned. So, what are you thinking about Chase Elliott and how far he can go?
Another one that's been kind of inconsistent, been relatively decent with top 10s though. So it definitely gets through the first round into the top 12. But kind of like Kurt Busch, I think he maybe stretches it into the 8th, but certainly doesn't get any further than that.
Okay. Next up. Let's see. What about Kenny? Chase Elliott first at 30-1. Is he going to get out of the first round?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I see him going. I see him making it to the final 8, but I think that's just based on, those guys. They've been, they've not been great, but they've been good. They've been decent. I don't know that they get a win, but I don't think if they did, I wouldn't be like, oh, that's a shocker. But it would be surprising, but I don't think I'd be shocked by it. But that team still, it's the group that Jeff Gordon had 2 years ago, so they're not new. But I think they're still learning a lot, in working with Chase, and he's learning a lot in working with them. And, he's not had, everybody talks about, well, you guys can lean on, Jimmy Johnson, who's won 7 championships. Everybody at Hendrick can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But when Jimmy's struggling through the summer, which he typically has, you're not going to be leaning on him because those guys are trying to figure out what's going on too. But Chase they've proven that they can be there, and I think in the playoffs that they pick it up a little bit. He gets to the round of 8.
And I know last year, we talked about the 2 rookies, Blaney and Elliott, and that Ryan Blaney might be not only just as talented, but he could be more talented than Chase Elliott for all we know, based on what we've seen from him coming into the Cup Series. He didn't have the same team, though, so it was more not surprised that Chase Elliott had a much better rookie season. But, boy, Ryan Blaney sure picked things up this year, Kenny, and proved just how good he is, not only by winning at Pocono, but he was inconsistent, maybe just as inconsistent, even maybe a little bit more so than Chase, but he had his moments,
mm-hmm.
and he's sitting there at 60-1.
Yeah, they had really good runs. The Wood brothers, that he drives for, they had really good showings, but their problem was they couldn't put it all together and finish it off. They would have a tire issue or because of contact on the track or I think they had a couple of races where they had broken axles that took them out of it. It's almost like if you look at, the first half of these races or the first 3/4 of these races, they were a much better team. But then when you look at the final result, it doesn't show for those guys. I think, Blaney's obviously very talented, and I think the Wood brothers, now that they're back to competing full time again, and they have the alliance with Team Penske, I think they're going to be contenders. But I don't know that they get past the first round, maybe into the second round. But I think you need the points, the strong average finishes in those first 3. And I think they're one of the teams that might not be able to put 3 good races together.
All right. Next up, let's see. CJ, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., 100-1. And not only did he win his first race at Talladega, he came back and won at Daytona. So that was a big surprise, but still nice to see him break through. And he's in the playoffs for the first time, but no, in the first round at least, there's no plate racing. So can he make it to the second round and get to Talladega?
It would be good for him if he does, but unfortunately, I just don't think that he does. I mean, he's had a better season than he's had in his entire career in the Cup Series, 2 wins aside. So even if you take those out of the equation, I still think he had a good season by his standards. But like you said, there's no restrictor plate race in this round. A little bit inconsistent, a little bit outside the top 15 too often for me. So I don't see him getting to round 12. I think he's out in this first round.
What about you, Kenny?
Yeah, excuse me. I agree. I mean, the restrictor plate race isn't until the second round, and that's where he's going to shine. But unfortunately, I don't think he's going to be still in contention at that point. I think he'll drop out after the first round.
All right, Kenny. What about Denny Hamlin? Denny Hamlin is next at 10-1, and he sure has picked things up in the second half of the season after a pretty slow first half. A whole bunch of top fives in the second half of the season, including the 2 wins.
Yeah, those guys have. The interesting thing to me will be what happens now that Mike Wheeler's crew chief has been out for. This will be the second week, I believe, that he'll have to sit out for an issue at Darlington when he was suspended for 2 races. It's not the perfect time for something like that to happen. Now, I'm sure a lot of their playoff stuff has already been built and everything's in place for that. So hopefully it won't impact them too much. And I think the fact that they've run as well, it's like they're peaking almost at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll carry those guys. And Denny's, he's been in the final round. I don't see him making it to the Final Four this time, but I do see him making it to the third round, the round of 8.
All right. What do you think about Denny Hamlin, CJ, at 10-1?
Completely agree. I think he gets to the round of 8, but it doesn't make it through to Homestead. I've got the same kind of crew chief concerns as Kenny does, but he's been pulling off some top 5s, which are better than some of the names that are ahead of him. So certainly getting to the round of 8, but I think that's where his run ends.
All right. CJ, what about Kevin Harvick, who's also at 10-1? And Kevin has not registered a top 5 in his last 5 races.
Yeah, it's been a little bit difficult for him. So his past 2 races actually were both outside the top 10, and a little bit of inconsistency. We usually think of him as Mr. Consistency, so that's a little bit concerning. But like Kenny said, they're going to have kind of different equipment as they come into the playoffs. They're going to have everything honed in, tuned in. So I think he gets to the round of 8. I'm not so sure I'd put him in the round of 4. I'd probably swap him and Kenseth for the 2 going into the Final Four. But I think Kenseth's consistency arguably gets him over the hump unless Harvick gets a win.
All right. And what do you think about Harvick there and how things have kind of tailed off for him lately, Kenny?
Yeah, that's kind of surprised me, Greg, that, when you look at his record so far this year, he only has 1 win, and it's at Sonoma. He's not had an awful season since that win. But I think he's only had 1 DNF at Daytona coming out of Sonoma. But he's not really been up front and leading a whole lot of laps like we're used to seeing those guys. I think it kind of reminds me of Truex. The way Harvick used to be. There was that time when they were finishing second like every week. But it was because something would break or they would have an issue. And that's kind of what Truex went through before they got all their stuff cleaned up, and they've got 4 wins. I can see Kevin getting pretty deep into the playoffs, but I don't see him going. I don't see him going into the Final Four.
All right. Also at 10-1, Kenny, we have Jimmy Johnson, and Jimmy once again has not really, his results. Last week his 8th place finish was his first top 10 since New Hampshire, and he hasn't had a top 5 since his win at Dover. But we know how Team Johnson with Chad Knaus, they know what they're doing. As evidenced last year, we didn't really expect Johnson to win the championship last year. He got a little lucky, of course, at Homestead, but hey, you got to earn your luck, and that's what they always seem to do. So what about Johnson? Because is he a bargain at 10-1?
It's hard to bet against him. Just, the guy's won 7 championships, and he's done it under a bunch of different situations. But I honestly believe that they've just not shown what we're used to seeing out of those guys. He's got 3 wins, and people forget that.
Yeah.
He's a defending champion, and I think people forget that. But, his 3 wins came earlier in the season, and they've not done anything since then. And, he's confident that it's the playoffs. I'm going to keep saying Chase till somebody pops me. But, it's, once the playoffs get here, those guys are able to pick it up. But, and I asked him at Darlington, I said, are you ever worried that that doesn't happen? That, you anticipate it and you expect it, but it doesn't happen. And he goes, yeah. He said, if you're a racer, you worry about that every week. You worry, am I still going to have the speed that I had before? Are we still going to, have the good pit stops? Am I going to make good decisions and stuff like that? So I think there's concern there. I don't see him going to the Final Four. I mean, he's going to make me look like a fool, but I don't see him being in the championship round.
Okay, and he's made a lot of us look like fools over the years.
Yeah.
Him and Chad Knaus. All right, 10-1 Jimmy Johnson, CJ.
Very similar story. I mean, the first half of the season was much better for them. Like you pointed out, other than Richmond, he hasn't had a single-digit finish since his win at Dover, and that was a long time ago. I think there's probably something, unless they've completely pulled the wool over everyone's eyes. I think he's going to the round of 12 and then, maybe the round of 8, but definitely not Homestead at this pace.
All right, what do you think about Keselowski then, CJ? Keselowski had 15-1. Those are big numbers for a driver of Brad Keselowski, if his stature. But as we mentioned early on in the show, Team Penske, they've kind of struggled the second half of the season, even though Keselowski's had his moments, but no wins since Martinsville real early in the season.
I actually have more confidence in him than I do in Jimmy Johnson because Keselowski more recently has actually started to overcome some of the troubles that they had starting in the middle of the season. So a lot of single-digit, a lot of top fives the first half, but then he does have a streak of 3 top tens or 3 single-digit finishes, and then 11th last week at Richmond. So, I mean, they're improving. They're getting there. They're not where they need to be. So I think that gets them through definitely round 16 into 12. I think it'll be tough for them to get to round 8, but I think that they can do it as long as they continue on the same path that they've been on.
All right. What about Keselowski then, Kenny? Do you think they can also turn it on?
Well, I think they can. I think they'll be competitive early in the playoffs, and they have been, I think, signs of getting a little speed back that they felt like they didn't have earlier in the year, and in the summer they talked about they didn't have the speed. Nobody really has a lot of stage wins besides Kyle Busch and of course Mark Truex, but Keselowski managed to pick up a few of those. So they've run relatively well, but they're not where they want to be, and I don't know that they can get there in time to go too deep into it. I see them going through the first round and getting into the second round, but I don't see them making the final 8.
All right, and now we've got the top 3. So before I get to the top 3, because these are all, of course, the drivers that have been consistently up here all season. You've got Larson at 5-1, you have Kyle at 3-1, and Truex at 2-1. Have you seen since we've had the chase before? Have you seen 3 drivers that have looked so good most of the season that you're going to find it almost impossible to keep them out of your predictions that they all make it to Homestead, Kenny?
No, I don't think so. I was trying to think, when you had Carl and Tony in there, and Tony was, he admitted he was struggling, and yet he comes in and wins 5 races. Nobody saw that coming.
True.
But then you had, a year when you had, when you had Harvick and Denny and somebody else, and Jimmy, I think, were three of the 4 battling for it. Those were pretty good. You look at those and it's pretty level, but it's like everybody talks about Truex this year and how strong that team's been. But when you put those 3 that we're talking about now side by side, they're pretty even. It's hard to really separate and say this team is so much better than those 2 teams. Because I honestly don't think there's a whole lot of difference in it.
And is there anything that you see, CJ, in those 3 races per round, when you take a look at, because again, as we mentioned, it's kind of interesting because Kyle Larson, we mentioned Truex had that run of 3 bad races in 5, even though one of those races was a win. And then we had Kyle Larson, who had a stretch of 5 bad races in 7, with a couple of runner-ups as the only 2 good races. But when you take a look at those results by those drivers, and Kyle's had some bad ones, but they've been spread out. Is there anything you look at in the stages and go, you know what? If this particular driver, because of these three races, maybe he doesn't get to the Final Four?
I'm looking at the racetracks. I mean, the only thing I could think of that might do that would be, one of them gets caught up in a wreck in Talladega. But I think, like Kenny said, all three of them have been so consistent throughout the years or throughout the weeks that at Charlotte and Kansas, even if that happens to them in Talladega, they're going to be top fives, and that's going to be enough points to get them through. I mean, certainly a round of 12. When you get to round of 8 to try to get to Homestead, you've got Martinsville, Texas, and Phoenix, where they've all been, top competitors. So I just don't see. I think it's going to be really difficult for definitely Truex and because of the stage points, but I think for all of them, just in general, just based on the way that they've been running all season, for them not to find their way into Homestead.
Yeah, the only thing I'm looking at is potentially with Kyle Larson. Like you said, you've got Talladega in the second round, and Larson did have trouble at Charlotte the first time around. So if he has bad trouble at Charlotte and Talladega, maybe. That's it. I mean, but that's just bad luck more than likely.
Yep.
So, and that could happen. All right. So tell me, Kenny, out of those three drivers, give me a little bit of analysis on those three and whether or not you're not going to have any of them make it to Homestead.
No, I'm gonna. I'll tell you right now, I'm gonna have all three of them go Homestead. But yeah, we talked to Kyle yesterday, and I asked him. I said, "Give me your favorite," and he said it's got to be Martin Truex. And he said those guys, that team has been so consistent all year. He said everywhere, and he said I'll tell you what the difference has been. He said his team, the 18 team and the 42 team of Kyle Larson. He said they're very similar as far as from a competition standpoint, what they've been able to accomplish. He said if we have a bad race or if Kyle Larson has a bad race, that means we finish 6th or 8th. He said if Martin Truex and that team has a bad race, it's meant they finish 2nd. Now, because they've just run so well everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And he said they're going to be the ones that everybody's going to have their eyes on. But, Larson has won 4 races. Kyle Busch has won a couple of races and run extremely well. And he's been on fire, honestly, even if he doesn't have like 6 wins during the second half of the season, he's run so well, and now he's going to be focused primarily on the Cup Series. He's not going to be worrying about the truck and the Xfinity car. I think that's going to benefit those guys. So, I put all 3 of them in there without any doubt. And Larson, he could have trouble and he could stumble somewhere. But I think they're consistent enough that they're not going to be, ones that are, they're not going to be like Harvick last year where they had to have a win to advance. I think these guys are all good enough that points will get them through.
And same question to you then, CJ.
Yeah, I have got them all 3 in the Final Four. I think once you get to Homestead, it's a different kind of story. I think Kyle Busch is right. Everybody's looking at Truex, but you still have to win Homestead to win the championship, and that's a tall task to accomplish. But without a doubt, I think I've got all 3 going in, even with a bum race in Talladega or perhaps one other track. They're all just so good and so consistent not to do it.
All right, so then the big question, well, actually there's 2 because you got to add another driver in there. So I'll start with you first, CJ. It looks like to me Matt Kenseth might be your sleeper at 25 to 1. Okay, so does that make him in your Final Four, or do you have another driver to go into the Final Four?
I was debating between him and Harvick because I think Harvick can turn things around and pick it up a little bit and find a way to get in there. But I do think Kenseth's consistency, there's no reason why he hasn't won a race. I think Kenny said that earlier in the show. So I see him getting into the Final Four, Kenseth.
All right. And what about you, Kenny? You've got the same 3. You've got Kenseth potentially as a sleeper. You tell me. And then who are you going to have making that final spot?
Yeah, he's my sleeper. I mean, he's the guy that I've got joining Truex, Larson, and Kyle Busch. Kenseth is, and I just think those guys, it's their last go around. They know he's not going to be back. They want to go out strong. It's not like they haven't been trying to win races up to this point. They have, but I'm pulling for a great story here more than I am, using common sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say, yeah, Kenseth's the guy.
All right, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same with the 3 drivers, but I'll put Denny Hamlin in there as my 4th choice. I had Hamlin in the preseason, and I still feel good about him now. Why not? Again, he's doing his best as he's entering the playoffs. No reason for me to take him out there. And I've kind of had Hamlin as a sleeper championship pick the last few years. I just think he's getting so close, and maybe this could be his year. My sleeper is going to be Kurt Busch at 60-1. I like the way that they're driving right now. I know that Daytona 500 jinx has happened before, but maybe that these guys have finally found the groove heading into the postseason. He's a champion. So I'll go with Kurt Busch as my sleeper at 60-1. And I will tell you right now, I'm going to go ahead because it'd be a little bit boring for me to take somebody like Martin Truex Jr., who, if I was going to take a second driver to win the championship, I would take Truex, but I'll go ahead and take Hamlin. He's 10-1. Those are good odds. So I'm going to go ahead and say that maybe Denny can put it all together, and he'll be my championship pick. So I'll start first of all with you, CJ. You've got the same 3. We all have the 3. You've got Kenseth in there. Who's going to win the championship?
Well, that comes down to the ability to perform at Homestead. And of my 4, the only ones that have won before at that track have been Kyle and Kenseth. However, if you look at last year, the laps led and who was really in contention, you got to look at one guy, and that's Kyle Larson.
Oh, so you're going to go with Larson to win the championship?
I am.
Very good for you. All right. Kenny, who are you going to go with?
Well, when we talked with Kyle yesterday, we talked to him about one thing we haven't mentioned yet, the pit crew swap. They will be using the pit crew of the 19 team, Daniel Suarez. And when we asked Kyle about it, he said, well, my pit crew's been good, but they've not been great. And if you want to get to the championship and you want to win the championship, you have to be great in every area, and that's an area that we thought we could improve in. So we made that change. And he said if it comes down to a late pit stop, then we're not going to have to worry about are we going to get beat off pit road. So those guys feel good about that. But honestly, I've seen so many teams that have been so strong throughout the season get into a championship battle and just
choke
shoot themselves in the foot, screw up, choke. Honestly, or they overthink things.
Sure.
Like we need to try to do this, or if they get behind early, they make the wrong call to try to catch up. And I'm going with Kenseth. I'm going to take him all the way.
Ooh, I like it. All right. Maybe I'm rubbing off finally on Kenny with these long shots. All right. Matt Kenseth at 25-1. I like it. All right. So there you go. First of all, CJ, before I let you go, you're at CJ Radune. That's your Twitter page. And what do you got working on right now, your latest RotoWire article?
We will have a DraftKings preview up after qualifying for this week's race at Chicagoland, and then following 24 hours after that, we'll have the NASCAR barometer up on the site at rotowire.com as well.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, CJ. We'll talk to you definitely, within the next month.
Sounds great. Enjoy the races.
Okay, take care. That's CJ Radune, again at rotowire.com. And Kenny, what are you working on right now over at NASCAR.com?
Well, we'll have at some point going into this weekend, I'll have a story up on teams going into the playoffs. They have 5 teams in there. It's time since the playoffs started that they've had 5 teams. They've only won 1 championship under this, the format, and it was with Kurt Busch in 2004. So we'll be looking at that. We'll also have some other stuff. NASCAR is going to have a new inspection process next year.
Oh, okay.
And they're gonna have part of it here this weekend, and they're going to have it, I think, at a couple of the playoff races to let teams look at it and kind of get used to it. And it basically combines, I think, 3 of the previous stations into one station, and it's more of it's laser based, and they take photos of the cars, and it's a little high tech, and it'll be something to get used to. But we'll have something on that they'll roll out next year for the teams.
Awesome. All right, Kenny, and then at Kenny Bruce, that's where we can find you on Twitter. So
Yeah.
thank you for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you at least one more time, maybe a couple times before the end of the season. Definitely before Homestead.
All right, Greg. Sounds great.
Thanks, Kenny. All right, that's Kenny Bruce from NASCAR.com, and also want to thank CJ Radune, of course, from RotoWire.com. These guys have been great, and they've been with us for several years here on the Prime Sports Radio Network. So we'll see you again sometime in the next few weeks for more coverage here on Prime Sports NASCAR on the Prime Sports Radio Network. Don't forget to check us out at 4:30 today for the Our-Lads Football Network as we preview Week 2 in the NFL. So for Kenny Bruce from NASCAR.com, for CJ Radune at RotoWire.com, I'm Greg DePalma, and we'll see you next time right here on Prime Sports NASCAR.
Another promise, another scene, another a package like to keep us trapped in greed.